Eric Durschmied
was born in Vienna in 1930, emigrated to Canada, attended the McGill University in Montreal. His career starts with a sensation. In the Cuban mountains, he is the first Western journalist to find the rebel Fidel Castro, interviews him, and he manages to smuggle the interview across the border, risking his life. So he was the first one to ever talk to Fidel Castro as a journalist in an interview. This interview was also became a film, Finding Fidel. As a war correspondent, he reported from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. About his work, the New York Times wrote he experienced more battles than any living general. For his film 700 Millions, 943 in Vietnam, he got an Oscar. He then became a lecturer for military history in the Austrian Officers' Education and also the West Point Academy. After a long TV career for BBC and CBS, he wrote bestsellers under the motto How Chance and Stupidity Wrote History. His books were turned into Hollywood and TV series. Totentanz is the first book that he published in German. In 2000, he was awarded the Austrian citizenship in the interest of the state. Eric Durschmied is the living example for this bridge between strategic thinking and strategic communication that we want to show here makes sense at the systemic level and is necessary and is not just an arbitrary connection. Eric Durschmied, could ask you for your presentation. Well, first I have to tell you that for 65 years I haven't spoken any German, so please don't laugh if I make mistakes. I can still speak Viennese or French like Maria Theresia, but my German is not so good. So anyway, normally I speak off the cuff without any manuscript, but this time, well, since I'm going to have to give this talk in German, well, I wrote it down and I hope you will understand that I will read this manuscript. So if I stumble and fall, please don't laugh at me. So I will start by saying that as a little boy, as a teenager, well, I did my A-levels here in Vienna at the grammar school, and then in 48, or was it 49? I don't remember. I went to Canada. And this coincidence, this chance encounter with Castro, well, brought me onto television, and I worked for the two biggest TV channels as a war correspondent for BBC London and for CBS New York. And my reports are not about strategy, about politics, they're just about chance and about stupidity. And a little later I'll talk about the role of a war correspondent, or what a war correspondent should or should not do, and how to deal with the media. A war is a battle, and, well, battles are characterized by, well, also arbitrariness, and sometimes characterized by stupidity. A man cannot win a battle alone, but one man alone can lose a battle. So in the end, even though the starting situation is often not very good, they ended in a triumphal victory. I'm thinking of Alexander Varius at Gaugamela in 331 BC. It happens in the middle of the battle. Alexander goes obliquely with a wedge into the enemy. They panic, they flee, and the Persian army, even though it is superior, collapses. Gaugamela is the end of Persian invasions in Europe. Alexander rules. So there is no secret formula, recipe for the victorious end of a battle. It all depends in the final analysis on which side is making the greater mistakes. And then comes the unexpected, determined by fate. However, the most incalculable factors is the force of nature. Now let us take 9/11 of the year 980. That was the day when The Romans stood in the rain. Emperor Augustus had ordered his nephew Varus to clean up these Germanic warrior tribes once and for all. So Varus takes his 3 legions and goes to Germania. He has 30,000 heavily armed legionnaires with all the trimmings, and he's only dealing with a few thousand bearded savages, and the tribes hate each other. So it's a walk in the park for a disciplined Roman army. But then Varus makes a dramatic mistake. He chooses Arminius from the Cheruscan tribe as a scout. This clever Arminius leads him to the narrow gorge of Düren in the Teutoburg forest, and this is where disaster strikes. It starts to rain. There's lightning, there's thunder, which is a good omen for the Germans, and, well, it is a disaster for the superstitious Romans. So the Teutons celebrate the god of war, Thor, with a hammer. So the ground is slippery, and when the Germanic tribes pounce, well, they can't find purchase. So it is with hellish shouting that the Germanic tribes pounce on the superstitious Romans of Varus. In desperation, Varus, impales himself on his sword because the bearded Germanic tribes do not leave any prisoners. So this is one of the decisive battles in history. After this major defeat of Rome, Magna Germania was never again attacked by Rome. The hinge factor in the Teutoburg forest was the weather. In August of 1281, the powerful emperor of China, Kublai Khan, planned the merciless subjugation of Japan. A huge fleet of 4,500 ships steers towards the Japanese island of Kyushu. Meanwhile, east of China, the sun is shining on the sea, water becomes steam, the steam rises into the cold atmosphere, a great mass of clouds form on the horizon. The rotation of the earth puts this mass into a circle, and a wild monster of 100 kilometers diameter is formed. So this monster typhoon smashes man and ship on the coastal rocks and coral reefs. A fleet is sinking into the depths. So this divine wind saved Japan. The Japanese call it kamikaze. So for the coming 7 centuries, Japan is spared foreign invasion. So much about coincidence and the weather. Among the 5 most stupid battles in history, there's the Battle of Karansebes. That takes the cake on the 20th of September 1788. Basically, it wasn't a battle. The Habsburg Emperor Joseph II, the son of Maria Theresa, the man who once told Mozart, "You have too many notes in your symphonies." Well, he spent his entire life under the military genius of Frederick the Great. Now he wants his 15 minutes of fame. So he has 130 men, and he fights against the Turks, and the Suleiman army is near Karansebes, a small city near the Timish River in today's Romania. A troop of hussars of the emperor rides over the bridge. There's no sign of the Turks, but a gypsy camp with barrels of liquor that they sell to the hussars. It's already dark when the first foot soldiers arrive at the bridge. They are thirsty, and they also want to drink from the schnapps barrels. The hussars don't like this at all. To frighten those thirsty soldiers, a hussar cries, "The Turks are coming!" And the cry goes through the army, "The Turks are here!" An officer rides along the river and shouts, "Stop, stop!" Which the men in this multilingual army, well, to them it sounds like, "Allah, Allah!" So the shooting starts in the darkness. Everybody screams, everybody is shooting, the cannons are crashing, and the emperor ends up in the creek. 3 days later, a Turkish vanguard appears at the bridge. They can't find any Habsburg army, but they find more than 1,000 dead soldiers. 1,000 dead, 100 dead, who knows how many there were. At the time, historiography was quite permissive with numbers. That's out of the question today. If you take the British Army officers of 1912, well, war is maybe a conflict between two clever minds rather than between two armed troops. The English of 1914 didn't think of Major General Aitken. In the morning of the 5th of November 1914, he appears with 5,000 Indian soldiers and a battle cruiser at the city of Tanga in German East Africa. There's no sign of defense there, just 4 gendarmes and a mayor who politely ask the British general for lunch. "My dear mayor, is the harbor mined?" "Yes, general." That's the German rule. It's because of this one sentence spoken by a mayor about the imaginary danger from mines, the lieutenant, puts his troops 2 kilometers away from the harbor, and it is separated from the city by a mangrove swamp. So he gives his Indians a rest because they suffer from seasickness. Then they unload the war material, so much stuff that it takes them 4 days to unload. And that gives the German Colonel Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck the time to turn a flood dam into a position with his 800 local askaris, with a German quality with 2 Spandau machine guns. Now, a week has gone by before the British general gives the signal to attack. So he's convinced that his Indians will make mincemeat of the African temporary soldiers. In a broad mass wave, the Indian soldiers stomp through the swamp, and the British officers are clearly recognizable by the bright red sashes. The askaris shoot them down one by one. Well, comes the next surprise. The swamp is surrounded by tall trees, and these trees hang diamond-shaped baskets, and these baskets house killer bees of true African greatness. The Indians are firing into the jungle, and their bullets shatter the beehives, and swaths of angry bees fall down on them. General Aiken watches his soldiers throw their weapons away and rotate their arms like windmill wings. "General, our men have fallen prey to a German miracle weapon." Well, the Battle of the Bees ends with much stricken and stung Indians back on the ships. And with the British war material left behind, Colonel Lettow-Vorbeck continues the war in East Africa for 4 years. So the hinge factor was an indecisive general and a swarm of bees. In 506 before Christ, the Chinese Sun Tzu, probably the greatest strategist of all time, wrote in his strategic Bible, "The supreme art of war is to defeat your enemy without battle." So the easiest way of conquering a fortress is with a bag of silver, like the Turks did on the 20th of May, 1553. After 2 months of a siege, the first units come in through the back door. It's the end of the Byzantine Empire and opens the Koran, the door into the Balkans, a new threat for Europe. The indecisiveness of a general leads to serious consequences. Napoleon marches on Austerlitz. So with his grand army, he has to cross the Danube. On the 20th of October 1805, the Habsburg General Karl von Mack blocks it with 30,000 men and 65 cannons near Ulm. But this General Mack is not really a brave man. There's a personal meeting between General Mack and Napoleon. Mack is standing like a frog facing a snake. Without firing a single salvo, he bows to the Frenchman and surrenders himself and his army with the words, "Her Majesty is facing the unfortunate General Mack." Now, Ulm was Napoleon's great strategic victory. There was never a fight. And this led to the Battle of Austerlitz, where 3 emperors were involved. It's Napoleon's masterpiece, and that made him the master of Europe. Historians sometimes just praise the battles and they talk about the excellent capability of the commander. For example, they awarded Napoleon the title of a genius and crown his victory at Wagram in 1809 with hot praise. Napoleon is really mad about losing at Aspern, and he wants to avenge himself, and he actually wins the battle at Wagram, but at an exorbitant price. To achieve his breakthrough through Archduke Karl's center, Napoleon burned about 1/3 of his best French troops. So Wagram was Stalingrad for Napoleon. The true capacity of an army commander can be seen at the moment of the greatest danger. It so happened on the 18th of June, 1815 in Waterloo. So it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A Vive l'Empereur is going over the battlefield. Cornelius Faeser sees the rioters attacking along the Charleroi. Well, they're going to submerge us, form carrés. His cannons fire last time, cannoneers into the carrés. Then the cuirassiers are jumping over the cannons, led by Marshal Ney's. Tonight they're going to celebrate me. Napoleon sees a wave of dusk coming in. No, Your Majesty, these people are in black uniform. It's Blücher. And before this Prussian interferes, I'll get Wellington's head. Well, he's now sure of that because Marshal Nimitz and his Cavalry Impériale overtook the 150 cannons or guns, and he has to watch and see how his cannoneers desert their cannons and flee. Wellington sees doom rising without artillery. Well, the battle is lost. Lord Oxbridge, what else do we have by way of cavalry? The Inniskillens, my lord, and the Scots Greys. How many, Oxbridge? How many? 4,000. Well, throw them into the battle. All of them, my lord? It's our last reserve before Brussels. All of them. They need to get off the plateau before Napoleon puts his infantry in march. No, Napoleon follows this attack of the cavalry, but one thing is wrong. A rider attack without infantry, that's clear madness. Where the hell is d'Erlon's infantry? Mon Dieu. Ney attacks without an infantry. Command to Erlon, rush the hill immediately with all battalions. Now, what now takes place on the plateau of Mont Saint-Jean is like the ride of the 10,000 Valkyries. The Colonel Hames, Marshal Ney's personal adjutant, hears the roar of Uxbridge's oncoming horsemen, and then he sees cannons. Mon Dieu, Wellington's guns aren't nailed yet. And that's the way it is. So 20 meters before the British carrés are the unnailed British cannons, without any cannoneers, but they're still ready to use. Nails, the nails, he yells, nail the fuses. And 1 out of 10 of his cuirassiers should carry a bag of headless nails in their saddlebag to seal the cannons torn from the enemy. A headless nail hammered into the ignition hole and nothing works anymore. 156 nails for 156 guns, and Wellington is done. But none of the French riders have a bag of nails, or at least no cuirassier ever gets off his horse. Meanwhile, d'Erlon's old guard battalions are already marching up the mountain. Up on the plateau Saint-Jean, all hell is breaking loose. British heavy cavalry and French cuirassiers collide. With the last hooray, Uxbridge's Irish and Scots drive Ney's cuirassiers from the plateau. The British gunners storm out of the squares. The carrés find their unnailed guns and fire death and destruction into d'Erlon's assaulting infantry. Load fire. And now, what has never happened before is happening. Napoleon's old guard is retreating. The old guard is fleeing. Everything is lost. In the next 10 minutes, Napoleon loses his empire. Now, very few people know about this episode of the unnailed cannons of Waterloo. Who should report about this? Ney's mistake would have taken Wellington's fame away. This is just a little footnote in a French archive. So the hinge factor at Waterloo was a handful of headless nails. So history often asks itself the question, what would have happened if Napoleon had won at Waterloo? The answer is, well, he would have lost on another day. So the greed and foolishness are often decisive factors in war. The 14th of October 1218 was supposed to change our European history. This wasn't about a battle, but it was a caravan of 450 Mongolian silk merchants. It is attacked by the Turkomans of the treasure-hungry despot of Samarkand. And in addition, this sheik cuts off the heads of the Mongols, and mad as he is, he sends them back in baskets to the head of the Mongols, a certain Genghis Khan, of whom mankind had not heard until then. Thereupon, the Khan brings together his great horde of 120,000 riders and sends them riding across the desert. The Mongolian hordes razes Samarkand to the ground and builds a monumental pyramid of heads chopped off. The despot manages to flee, the Mongols persecute him, and they come further west. They devastate the Middle East and Russia. They burn Moscow, Novgorod, Kiev, Budapest falls. On the 9th of April 1241, they destroy the last Crusader army near Silesia. Then there's a chance, a lucky strike. The great Khan dies, the great horde turns around and disappears forever into the steppe. So this Mongolian scare had another result that still reaches into our present. In today's Iran, the horde encounters the terrorist sect of the Assassins, followers of a Muslim fundamental theology based on heroic suicide. Their prophet, Hassan al-Sabah, guaranteed his suicidal followers an afterlife in paradise. The Mongols storm the assassin fortress and roast the prophet on a spit. This ends the suicidal cult of terror for the next 745 years. Personal fame and vanity also play a big role. This takes us to the Dolomites, the Col di Lana. The Austrians call it the Iron Mountain, and the Italians call it the Mountain of Blood. Based on the strategic principle of Julius Caesar, a land that is surrounded by the sea on three sides only needs with the opponent on the northern front. In 1915, the Italian commander, General Luigi Cadorna, promises to take Innsbruck in just 2 weeks and Vienna in 3. This vanity-based project, well, he wants to also conquer a summit near Tyrol. This is the summit where he wants to plant his tricolor, and he overlooks a problem. It's a very steep hill, it's very smooth rock, and there are 300 Tyroleans at the top. They know the mountains, and in the valley behind them, that's their village. So the Italian losses are gigantic. Thousands mowed down by the marksmen from Tyrol, or torn down by avalanches. A report about this Cima di Sangue, this blood mountain, appears in the Corriere della Sera. And now Cadorna must make up for his showiness. More people die around this rock until the Italians blow up the top of the mountain, and this failure kills everybody on top and people around it. The Italians climb up over ruins and dead soldiers and find that the mountain is completely worthless from the strategic perspective. Thereupon they give up their mountain of blood without a fight. So last year I wrote a book about this. It's called Totentanz, Dances of the Dead, and that's what it looks like, if you're interested. So the reason was that I had something personal to do with the Col di Lana. Well, this madness happens in any war. There's no difference. One of my documentaries from Vietnam won an Oscar, and it ended with the words, Hill 943 was stormed twice and abandoned twice by American forces, and today the North Vietnamese are again on top of Hill 943. There's another war, another massacre. I don't know whether you can see it. That's my assistant, and that's me, the one with the camera, that's me. So he's lying on the stretcher. Well, another war, another massacre. South of Basra in Iraq, 20,000 Iranians attack, and 5 hours later there are 15,000 Iranian dead. Around their necks there's a piece of string, a plastic key. That's their access to paradise. They already forgot where they were yesterday, but they all know where they will be at 2 o'clock on 9/11 in 2001. On this day, TV became the spokesperson of terrorists. Religious fanatics used planes as burning swords. So what does a terrorist need? With a Kalashnikov, it takes them 5 minutes. They get 5 minutes of global attention. But television depends on sensational images. This is Iraq, Basra. That's what I talked about, these 10 or 15,000 people who were killed there. So they came through the swamps, and in this dam there were 300 Iraqi tanks. And they mowed them down like rabbits. So our reportages have shown that war is not we're professionals, but we feel the same pain, the same fear, like everybody around us. But we have no choice. We have to go where the loudest bangs happen. So if a picture is not dramatic, you weren't probably close enough. So my motto has always been, get in, get it, and get out. I know that the ball that I can't hear is the one that's going to tear off my head. Of the 400 German war reporters and cameramen in 1939, in the end, only 6 were left. I spent 10 years in Vietnam. Of the 8 reporters, 5 stayed there forever. My assistant was badly wounded, as you've seen on the stretcher. Well, reporters always knew how to portray the terrors of war, but the real horror of war is not just the torn bodies, but the human tragedy of the people who are left behind. That brings us to the moral question. Which story do we write about, and which pictures do you show? Or better, do you not show? So there's a choice between patriotism and truth. In America we call it wave your flag or let it all hang out. We are the most visual generation of all times, and we live in the time of electronic reports. A tsunami in Japan and you're there. An assassination in Paris and you're there. So nothing happens that isn't reported or covered live. A passerby becomes an amateur reporter. A smartphone is enough. And with the speed of satellite transmission via smartphone, the role of the reporter changes from a where and what to a who and why. Where? In New York. What? A plane hit the Twin Towers. So this terrible message was on the screen via smartphone immediately. And later we talked about who, Al-Qaeda, and why, the religious terror. And there's another wisdom of Sun Tzu. He said that the supreme art is to deceive your enemy. So a camera angle, for example, can show destruction, losses. You can minimize those losses or make them appear terrifying. So that is enough to affect the opinion of a nation. Here you have it. So journalists, and especially war reporters, the guardians of a democratic society. They're just as important today as in the day and age of Tacitus. We are visual people. If we see what we are today, we can decide what we want to be tomorrow. Deception or cyber war is psychological warfare. It serves to undermine the morale of the opponent or give courage to your own population. A cyber war officer describes, well, a badly thrown bomb as collateral damage. For him, every defeat is, either a retreat or a shortening the front line. In 1945, I experienced that when the Russian tanks rattled down the Maria-Hilfer-Straße in Vienna. Us reporters, well, we always contributed to cyber wars without knowing it. In the Yom Kippur War at 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone is sounding south of Beersheba. There's a tank battle. We rush there, and at the beginning of the Sinai, we come to a crossroads, and there's a jeep with an Israeli military policeman. I expect him to block our journey, but no sign of it. "Where are you going?" he says in a very kind way. "Oh, to the tank battle." "Ah, to the tank battle. You'll have to go down this road." And he points to the desert road turning left. About 40 minutes later, we arrive at a battlefield with burning Egyptian tanks and vehicles. 10 years later, I'm having lunch with my then Israeli press officer, and I tell him about the story with the military police officer who showed us the road to the tank battle. "Well, something like that is only possible in your army." And he smiles. "That's why we put the man there, because if you'd just gone straight, you would have also seen burning tanks, but those were our tanks." So give a reporter something he can bite into and he won't ask questions. So for the military, it is far more sensible to provide a little bit of true information, because in the end, a good journalist always finds something to report about. A military rapporteur must not speculate, not spin around or play with the figures. Reports have to be precise. We've shot down a lot of tanks won't work, because how much is many? There's this perpetual juggling with losses and figures of losses. Our losses are light. 10 dead in a division of 10,000 isn't a lot, but 10 out of 100, that's another thing. In the Vietnam War, there was the daily body count. Counting the dead was invented by the Mongolian Genghis Khan. His men would cut off a man's left ear and would stuff it into bags. 5 full bags were a great victory. So sometimes we show frustration. So in the attack of Basra, I have my satellite phone. I'm standing next to a rapid-fire battery, and somebody from New York wrote me, "Oh, we can't hear you. Call us on a better line." So a new danger that we hardly know anything about is cyber war. So in cyberspace, the enemy is invisible, and the way to a solution of a danger is unclear. Therefore, it is not possible to predict how a nation or a president will react to a cyber attack. So the connection between cyber war and the use of nuclear weapons now becomes obvious. And that in turn brings me to the maybe greatest hinge factor in our history. On the 6th of August 1945, the World War is already 5 years old. Germany has surrendered, but the war won't end. In the dark, a B-29 superfortress of the 20th American Air Fleet takes off from the Tinian Atoll in the Pacific. It doesn't carry bombs, and yet this plane was to be responsible for the deaths of 100,000 people. An hour later, another silver-gray B-29 takes off, and this 4-engine giant bird carries a bomb. It's long, it's thin, and it weighs 4,535 kilograms. 46 kilos of that went to metal cones with a specific weight of uranium-235. In a sealed envelope the target comes together with a strict command. This special weapon is only to be dropped over a target with the best visibility conditions, either Kokura, Niigata, Hiroshima, or Nagasaki. So it is up to the pilot to choose. At 7:25, within visibility of the Japanese islands, the pilot gets the message from the meteorological service. Two of the targets are covered by fog or by clouds. So the command is bomb primary. So the giant bird goes in the final direction and is a whim of nature that determines the destruction of a city. So bomb primary was the city of Hiroshima. At 8 hours, 15 minutes and 17 seconds, the sky over Hiroshima explodes. People turn to dust, and with a huge fireball, the nuclear age began. And this takes us to the last formula in this incredible confrontation in the nuclear age. One man, one plane, one bomb. Or as it's said today, one unmanned ballistic missile. So Star Wars isn't just a movie. In this uncertain strategic game, even a dry run is nothing but a practice run to kill millions. Nobody learns from history anymore. So be careful. Machiavelli once said, "My prince, a war starts when you start it, but it doesn't stop when you want it to stop." So war has always been a total confusion of the ordered world. I can't say whether war will be needed for the further development of mankind. I only know that it has always taken an important position since Cain and Abel. Killing dominated everything else. A war reporter is never on vacation. For 30 years I described damage and destruction. And the last thing I would like to add in English.
Push the button, then I think the last hinge factor we all know what would happen. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Durschmied. This has been a fantastic presentation of examples, war example, focusing on chance, stupidity, and world history. It is no a coincidence that with this contribution on today, on the 28th of June, this contribution has been made because 104 years ago in Sarajevo, the Austrian Crown Prince was murdered, and there too, chance and stupidity paid a contributory role. We know the outcome, 17 million dead in Europe, a new order of the world. And at the same time, the foundation on the basis for a situation that were actually poorly prepared by the negotiation and provided a terrible basis for World War II. And therefore, briefly now, a Q&A session. We'll keep it short. And are there any questions to our author and war reporter, Brigitte Peischler-Me? We actually have called Ilana as a year name. This was the senseless taking of a mountain, which has actually entered history as a blood mountain in the Southern Alps. And you wrote a book about it. And I think it was your grandfather who was fighting in the Dolomites, right? Can you hear me? Yeah, well, a reason why I wrote the book was my father was on Col di Lane on the 16th April. He was wounded, and he was actually transported to the next mountain, and on the 17th of April, 10 later, after he had been wounded, the Col di Lana was exploded with all the people who had been on it. Not only the people at the top were dead, but also the Italians who had been waiting to storm the mountain were also dead. There were 300 Tyroleans that were dead and 6,000 dead Italians. And this shows the nonsense that I wanted to show with this book, because this mountain had no strategic significance whatsoever. Behind the Col di Lana, there is the peak of the Dolomites. So if you take Col di Lana, you still have to overcome Tofana, a much higher mountain, 1,000 meters higher than Col di Lana. And this was the stupidity of that undertaking. And the chance and coincidence in Sarajevo was the jeep was on the road, on the street. One told the driver to go straight, and the driver never got that message. And he turned right, and somebody was shouting, "You are on the wrong road." He braked, and then this was the very moment when the shot was fired. So if anybody has a question, I'm willing to answer. Yes, please use a microphone. Madam Krüger. Thank you very much. Also from my side, Ella Krüger from Germany, from TU Darmstadt. And I have a question. What do you think with the modern means? What would actually a war reporter need today for the job that you did for so many decades? And do you think that you would actually, could you work as a consultant? My second question, I didn't get it, says Mr. Durschmied. How do you think you could work as a consultant on strategy based on your experience of war and war reporting, or do you think that this is not something you could do? Well, a reporter, may I say this in Viennese, does actually not understand much, but takes the pictures and thinks, God, you're also stupid. A reporter reports and has to be impartial. But how can you be impartial? You were born, you're a Catholic, you're a Protestant, a Jew. You cannot be impartial and totally unbiased. Even the most impartial war reporter always has something going on in his mind. And my question on Israel was, what do you think? What did you think then at the Yom Kippur War in '67? And I had to admit, well, my feeling was with the Israelis, but as a reporter, I could just show and count. I could count 1, 2, 3, 4 dead. You cannot say 4 Israeli dead, 4 Egyptian dead. And this is also the story about the tanks, because the cyber officer, he was so smart. Well, you don't have to don't go straight. There is a sign. No entering, no trespassing, go to the other side. And he pointed us to the right direction, but the world scope was not the burning Egyptian tanks, but it would have been the burning Israeli tanks, and those they weren't shown to us. So this for me is a good cyber act. Do we still have time? I'll give you another example. In Vietnam, I was in a helicopter with an American officer, and he's dropping leaflets, and I say, he said on the leaflet, it says, "Come out of the jungle and surrender." And I thought, what a silly thing to do. And I said, what if they don't come out? Then he said, then we will go into the jungle and we'll splat them. And I said, are you going to shoot them? And he said, yeah, that's right. So this is also a cyber war, in my opinion. We're dealing with the question of strategy here and the development of strategy. What you have shown us in an impressive way, based on your experience and your knowledge of history, is you address times when strategy were actually becoming invalid in a second. And our topic is here resilience. So my question to you is, in how far is the ethos, with all the effects that we have seen and the shocks that you have photographed and filmed, how can you say the truth is a danger and strengthens the opponent? Is this something that is a conflict for a journalist? And how can you deal with this conflict? In addition to the personal coping that you need to do when you took pictures of dead? Well, I can say there are very few examples where a journalist actually took photos of the deads on his own side. You always have the feeling you're on the side of the good party. A journalist reports always on the good side. So if a journalist today, and it has happened to me several times throughout my career, I was flying from one fight from one war to another. You arrive somewhere and they say this is the biggest war of all times. Well, for me, the biggest war of all times was 1945. So why I became a journalist, this was sheer coincidence after the filming of Fidel Castro. In journalism, in good journalism, there is something that we have sort of inbuilt. And even if we know what's happening, for example, I knew one day, 10 hours before the attack on Basra, I knew that they were going to attack there, and I went there. Somehow I got there. I was there before the Iranians arrived. But I did not take the telephone and say, you know, they're going to do this and that. And you don't do that. A good journalist doesn't do that. But today, with Trump, I don't know what I shall answer, because the guy gets up 7 o'clock, sees all the Mercedes that are waiting and says, we don't want to have German cars. And then he calls somebody and says, tomorrow we meet Putin in Singapore. It's very difficult today to be a good journalist. And in addition, television has changed totally. It's become entertainment news. And this is something I've seen, that we had got a telex from New York. Why are the flames of NBC higher than ours? What kind of thing is this? We were two cameras positioned next to each other. The other network's flames were higher, and this became an issue. You get an idea in this way what it's about. Entertainment news. In Vietnam, it was simple. We went into a battle. There were victims on both sides, dead. We had to go back to Saigon. This took us 2 hours, 4 hours, depending on where we were. Then we had to put the film onto the plane. The plane went to Tokyo, from Tokyo to San Francisco. Then it was copied, edited. This was usually 4 days. The blood was no longer red, it was brown. And those 4 days, we had time to count the dead. We didn't say many dead. We said 126. So this was the difference. We don't have this anymore. Today's everything is live. It's so fast. And sometimes I wonder about the journalists. I saw this in the last Gulf War. One was running around with a gas mask on, and through the gas mask did his report. It is crazy. You don't do a thing like that. But this network had to do something sensational. Now, this is my answer to your question. I do hope it does answer your question. Thank you so much. Eric Durschmied, thank you for your presentation, for your insights, for sharing your experience with us, and also talking about your experience as a war reporter, and also sharing your work as an author with us. In view of the time and in order to progress, we are about half an hour behind our schedule. I would like to ask you to have the lunch break, and at 1:25 we will meet again and continue with the lecture by General Golan from Israel. Thank you so much. Bon appetit. And at the end, again, as is customary, I would like to hand over our conference wine to you, Austrian red wine. Thank you so much.